Welcome back to Dark Night Scare. In today's video, I am sharing 9 truck driver, true terrifying stories. Stay tuned and please subscribe this channel and like this video. Thank you all. Now let's start. Derek J. recounted his experience driving alone back home from a friend's remote house about an hour away. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., a time he couldn't precisely recall, but he was extremely tired and considered sleeping over, though calling in sick wasn't really an option. Much of the drive took him through large farmlands. He had music playing to stay awake, staring ahead at the empty road. However, about 20 minutes in, his headlights caught something right in the middle of the road. He slowed down, braking a bit harder than necessary, to find a closed suitcase standing upright there. He stared at it for a strangely long time, simply tired and taken aback, deciding to swerve into the oncoming lane to go around it. He wasn't keen on stopping to move it. He figured it must have fallen from a truck and landed like that, unable to think of another reason. He continued driving, thinking about the suitcase for a bit, but ultimately forgetting about it quite quickly. Maybe 5 minutes later, the road remained quiet as he cruised along, when once again, something appeared in his headlights. This time, it was a truck parked dead center in his lane, with no lights or blinkers on. If he hadn't had his high beams on, he might have been in serious danger. He stopped behind the truck, waited a moment, and honked a few times. But the truck didn't move at all, and he saw no movement inside through the back window. After waiting for 30 seconds, he began to slowly pass it, noticing a few large dents and scrapes on its side. He couldn't tell if it was from a recent accident or just an old, poorly maintained truck. What was more concerning, however, was that he didn't see anyone inside. It was still dark, and looking through the windows, he saw no shape or outline of anyone in either the front or back. He pulled further up and onto his side of the road, then slowed more to look around. Still just farmland stretched in all directions. Why would someone park right there and abandon their vehicle? There was nothing around. He felt strange, kind of creeped out, honestly. He continued down the road, having a bad feeling, and not wanting to linger. After that incident, he was definitely more awake. Were the suitcase and the truck somehow connected, or had they just both conveniently appeared in the middle of the road? He never saw anyone stop to retrieve the suitcase later, so he didn't know. He only drove for another minute before he was forced to stop a third time. There was a person in the road, standing in his lane and waving his arms for him to stop. The man looked to be in his early 40s and was pretty disheveled. Messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms, and overall not in good shape. Once stopped, the man smiled and walked up to his window. "Hey," he asked, "did you see a truck not too far back that way?" Before answering, Derek asked why it was parked in the road like that and what the man was doing out there, feeling these were reasonable questions given the circumstances. The man stumbled over his words for a second before saying he'd run out of gas and was trying to walk to a gas station. But why ask Derek to drive him back to the truck? Wouldn't he have asked for a ride to the gas station? The man kept talking, seeming not to let Derek think too hard about it. Now Derek was the one stumbling over his words, trying to think of an excuse to say no. Just then, his eyes wandered behind the man and saw something sticking out of the crops beside the road. It looked like the rear end of a small car. It was deep in the crops, but he could see one rear headlight faintly reflecting his car's light. He didn't know what the hell was going on, but he knew whatever it was wasn't good. He rolled the window up, and instantly the man's smile turned to a frown. His eyes widened and he started yelling and hitting the window. Derek pulled away and sped down the road. He quickly took out his phone and called the police. He was told later that the truck was gone by the time the police arrived, but the car in the crops was still there. And, he guessed, the scene was far worse than he had imagined. That was someone else's car, and the driver in it was no longer alive. Not from a crash, though. It seemed they had likely picked up a hitchhiker, the guy Derek had just seen. Unfortunately, that was the last thing they ever did. It's assumed that the suitcase and the truck in the road were somehow used to get the car to pull over and pick them up, but it's not certain. Obviously, the hitchhiker he'd seen wasn't telling the truth about his truck running out of gas. It was likely just an act of violence by some crazy person for no real reason. It made it even more terrifying that he had been so close to that man and that the man wanted him to let him into his car, just like the other driver had. The man was never identified. Kyle B. shared his story, mentioning he was 32 and worked for a trucking company. This incident occurred around the holidays. While the roads weren't too bad overall, driving in winter was always a bit more tiring. That particular night was unremarkable. He left town at 6 p.m. to deliver a load 2 states away. Around 11 p.m., he made his first stop. He pulled into a small truck stop by the roadside, just to use the bathroom, grab a coffee, and maybe rest his eyes for a short while. He parked, went into the building, came back out with his coffee, and got back into the driver's seat. He took a moment for himself, sitting there, taking a few sips and looking around. Only a couple of other trucks were in the parking lot. It seemed like a quiet night. As he sat there, he happened to spot someone near the back of the building. The lights were dim back there, but a guy was leaning against the wall, looking out in his direction. He couldn't see the guy's eyes, but his truck was the only one parked over there. There was nothing else to look at. Kyle minded his own business and kept sipping his coffee, but every time he looked back, the guy was still looking over here. He was sure it was nothing, but it still felt too weird for him to get any sleep. Snow was starting to fall as well. He put his drink in the cup holder, started the truck, and pulled out, beginning the next part of the drive. The coffee definitely helped keep him awake. The roads were completely empty. About 30 minutes down the road, a light glinted in his side mirror for just a moment, like a reflection of something behind his trailer. He kept checking his mirrors, thinking it might be a car coming up, but he saw nothing behind him. Maybe it was a broken reflector on the road or something. He didn't know. The snow was beginning to pile up on the road though, so for the next while, he was more focused on what was ahead, making sure he made it safely. He thinks a good hour or so went by like this. Staying focused on the road was getting more exhausting, with every minute. Then again, there was a quick glint in his side mirror. He barely shifted his eyes quick enough to catch it this time. There was a car right behind his trailer, so close that it was completely hidden by his mirrors. Its headlights were off too, so only when it was slightly off to the side did his headlights reflect onto theirs, creating that little glint he was seeing. He wasn't new to people tailgating him for going slow, but this was really strange, especially in this weather, being that close and with no headlights. What were they doing? After thinking about it for a minute or two, he decided it was best to get away from them, or at least keep them off his tail, for both their safety. He merged into the other lane, but the car followed. Confused, he merged back into the right lane. This time, he thought they got the hint that he was onto them, and they stayed on their side. They started to slow down though, and eventually they fell out of sight. He had no clue what they were doing, but at least they were off his back. He drove on the quiet road through the snow for another 2 hours. It was around 3 a.m. when he decided to pull off at a rest stop for a few hours of sleep. It was just one of those small cutaways off the road that could fit maybe 2 or 3 semis. No building or restrooms, just a parking area. He parked, cut off the engine, leaned his chair all the way back, and closed his eyes. He dozed off, pretty fast. He was used to limited sleep, so every minute counted. The calm wind and snow trickling down definitely helped too. He planned to wake up when the sun came up, so maybe 3-ish hours, but he woke up before that. He slowly opened, his eyes seeing the dark truck cabin in the faint highway lights ahead. He was still really tired. He didn't know why he'd woken up. After a second, he rolled his body over to reposition himself, but was instantly met by eyes outside his window. They were staring in at him with disturbingly wide, creepy eyes. He almost fell out of his seat. The guy outside didn't even flinch. He just stepped down and tried to open the door. After a few tries, though, he heard the guy's footsteps rushing away in the snow. He used the radio to call for help, and moments later, a car drove out from behind his truck. It was the same one that had been on the road before. He gave as much description as he could. As the officers asked him to go over everything that happened that night, he remembered the man he'd seen watching him at the truck stop. Maybe it was him the whole time, but why was he stalking him? And what was he trying to do? He never found out. E.E. began his story by mentioning he was 16 years old. He had just gotten a job at a pizza place about 6 months prior, and during that time, saved up enough money to buy a cheap car. He hated not being able to drive himself to work, but he also wanted to do deliveries instead of working inside the shop. It was a regular weeknight. He got in after school at 5 p.m. and was scheduled to work until 10:30 p.m. The first couple of hours were busy, but by 8 p.m. it abruptly slowed down. There wasn't another delivery to be made until 9 p.m. It was an online order for Mavo, just 2 medium pizzas. He picked them up and started driving. It wasn't busy out, just a few cars here and there. But once he got about 5 minutes out from the neighborhood, a car pulled onto the road from a side street and came up behind him. The roads were otherwise empty, and the car could have easily passed him if they'd wanted to, but they stayed, right behind him. He didn't really think about it. Honestly, he didn't care at all at the time. Throughout the next 5 minutes, they stayed right behind him. When he took the turn into the neighborhood, he looked in his mirror. After a few seconds, their headlights appeared, turning down the road. That felt like a pretty big coincidence. What were the chances that the only other car on the road was going to the same small neighborhood as him? He guessed it was very possible, but it got him feeling a little more aware of the situation. He kept driving. This street went through woods with individual houses spread out on either side of the road. Some were right up on the road, and some were down longer driveways. As he got deeper into the neighborhood, finally, his headlights lit up a mailbox that had the right address on it. He turned into the driveway. He checked his mirrors again, and a few seconds later, the car passed right by and continued down the road. He remembered feeling relieved and a bit silly for thinking anything of it. He drove to the end of the driveway. It wasn't too long, maybe like 200 feet or so, pulled up, and got out with the pizzas. He gave the door a couple of knocks. Nobody answered for a minute. The porch light was on, but it didn't look like any of the inside lights were on. He knocked again. About 30 seconds passed, then a light shone through the window, and a few seconds later, a woman answered the door. She looked like she was in her early 30s, was wearing a nightgown, and looked really tired. Immediately, something about this felt wrong. He said, "I had these pizzas ordered to this address." He then read the address out to her, but she just looked annoyed. The woman said she hadn't ordered anything and was trying to sleep. She was definitely a little cranky, but it was clear there was some kind of mistake. He apologized and walked off the porch. He was kind of spaced out for a moment, looking at the ground and thinking about how weird this was as he walked back to his car. But about halfway there, he looked up and felt a chill rush through him. There was a car sitting right behind his car. It was the same one that he'd thought was following him. Its headlights were off, but he could see the fog coming from the exhaust, so the car was still running. He felt really uncomfortable. Did they also live here with the woman and were just pulling in? Or did it have something to do with the order? Everything just felt really off, like too coincidental. He knew something was wrong. He continued walking to his car, hoping they would see him and either say something or move. He got in and tossed the pizzas on the passenger seat, turned his car on, but they stayed there. The driveway was thin. There wasn't really any space to go around them. But he rolled further up toward the house and turned around. Surely they would see that he was trying to leave now. They still remained right in the middle of the driveway, blocking the exit. There was about 30 seconds as he faced their car, and they faced him, and they both just sat there. During that time, he kind of put everything together. Them driving, behind him, following him into the neighborhood, and the creepy sudden appearance of them blocking the driveway. None of this was a coincidence. He felt his body start to go numb as his heart started pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to do. Then, their car doors opened. 4 men got out. They all had hoodies and hats on, covering pretty much their whole faces. One of them had his hand suspiciously tucked into his hoodie pocket, like he was holding on to something. They started running up to his car. He panicked. He hit the gas, trying to go around them and past their car, but there wasn't enough room. The wheels went off the driveway and skidded in the dirt, ramming into a tree. It was a pretty slow hit. The airbags didn't even go off or anything, and he didn't think the car was stuck. But he didn't take any chances. He jumped out and started running. He heard one of them chasing him and yelling to the others, but they turned back after a little bit. When he was safe, he stayed in the woods and called 911. When the officers got to the home, all of the men and both cars were gone. His car was never recovered, even to this day. Essentially, what happened was the group used some random address to lure him there by ordering a pizza, hoping to trap him. What they were going to do with him is unknown. The fact that one of them chased him makes him think they didn't plan on letting him go. He got lucky that night. I've been driving trucks for close to 15 years now. This particular incident happened back in 2017. I was on an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, heading towards a destination in Arizona. I believe I was delivering appliances, but honestly, I don't really recall. It was pitch black all around, darkness extending in every direction. My Semi's headlights were quite dim at the time, and I'd been putting off getting them fixed for ages. Usually I couldn't really tell, but with virtually no other cars on the road, the dimness was much more noticeable. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes just to make out the road ahead. That situation alone could have been a horror story. I debated pulling over for a couple of hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste the time. I really needed the money then, so I kept driving, even though it wasn't entirely safe. I figured, since it was pretty much a straight line, it should be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I spotted something approaching quickly. In the distance, worried I might hit an animal, I slammed on the brakes and my truck screeched to a halt. Then I realized what was there. A car with its hazard lights flashing. The odd thing was, it was right in the exact middle of the road, literally sitting on the double yellow line. What was even stranger was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to boast, but I consider myself a pretty fearless individual, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of that, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I figured maybe someone needed a jump start or something. So, I backed up the Semi and pulled over. I thought about setting down some flares, but decided against it since I hadn't seen another single car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and walked over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how odd it was that there was hardly any wind. It was also incredibly quiet that night. The faint clicking of the hazards was the only sound in the entire desert, it felt like. Getting closer to the car, I clearly remember it was a newer looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car cautiously. As I'd said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the vehicle and stopped dead in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of that too. I checked the back seat and any spots someone might be hiding. There was literally nobody inside. All of a sudden, I felt much less certain about the situation. I had expected someone needing help of some sort, maybe even someone who'd just taken a nap in a really dumb spot. I definitely wasn't expecting this though. The car was just empty. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, feeling considerably more uneasy. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was, it was so dark I couldn't see very far in front of me, except for what my headlights illuminated. It was eerie. I waited a bit longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and just forgetting the whole thing. Someone was definitely out there, somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep looking into it. I looked inside the car again, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was off. I got out of the car and walked over to the trunk. I figured, might as well have a look. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. I grabbed the key from the ignition and unlocked the trunk, but still, it wouldn't open. It was jammed shut from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried reaching the trunk from the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened that way. Inside, there were 3 squishy garbage bags, along with a rope that was tied shut around the trunk. I remember glancing one last time over my shoulder before reaching for the bags. The area seemed clear. I must have been within 5 inches of one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car, shocked. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and scrambled out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a gruff voice yelling in the distance. He yelled, "Hey!" a few times, and his voice sounded like it was getting closer fast. I scrambled into the semi, turned it on, and put it in gear as quickly as possible. I remember cursing repeatedly as the engine initially stalled. That's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling away, I saw a person standing by the trunk of the car. It was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he held a small shovel. In his right, an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck started to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled, "Wait!" a few times, but there was no way I was stopping for another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds, before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no chance of that. I floored it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for maybe 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching from behind. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and explained what happened as best I could. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking frantically at me. Honestly, I didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying he wouldn't try and ram me. After about 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and slammed on his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when, finally, flashing police lights appeared up ahead. The Ford swerved off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from view. I pulled over and waited for the officer to arrive. I frantically told him what had happened, but the officer seemed more interested in getting a report from me than chasing the guy down. I was so angry about that. I told the officer, like twice, that he could probably catch up if he left right then. The cop told me not to worry and that they'd do a thorough search once backup arrived. He sent me on my way, saying they'd call if they ever had an update. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel, or why he tried to follow me though. The bags in his trunk were also too small for bodies, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a sick dog out of its misery or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers document their daily routines and offer tips to each other, or maybe you haven't. But being relatively young in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons. People always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not that bad of a gig though. I've been making deliveries for well over 2 years now. Obviously, the only really tough part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain during the lonely hours. That's what happened to me. Anyway, This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not sound that crazy, but factor in the fact that I had just completed an 8-hour trip, and that puts things into perspective. I wanted to get the deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I'd get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console for a Red Bull, but of course there weren't any. I'd forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is stopped, even if it's only for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice. Either fall asleep on the road or stop and get an energy drink. In my mind, those options were pretty much equivalent, so I reluctantly pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio by that point. Too late, I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. Not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, it looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there, if anything. So, I parked the semi and made my way over to the first convenience store. To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things. Either the place would be open or the door would be locked. Imagine my surprise then when the door swung open into a pitch-black store. I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and find a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I noticed a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly. To my pleasant surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door but found nothing, literally nothing. The shelves had literally been removed. The whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating, but I didn't have time for this. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open, thank God. I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here though, so I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway. The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator. No matter what theory I thought of, I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rearview mirror as the curtains seemed to billow and move, even though I didn't have the air on. I thought the worst. There was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly dialed the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police. After they opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All three of them refused to talk, but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Kevin. I've been a trucker for various companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me, who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns snapping up these jobs. This isn't always great though. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between keeping your job and getting fired. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to get it all out of the way in one shot, so I planned my route into Montana accordingly, figuring I wouldn't stop even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination. Very early the next morning, I pushed the semi as much as possible, maybe going a couple of miles over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff, and you're wide awake. You had to be careful though. Too many uses back to back could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and threw my head back. My reflexes took over. I felt the adrenaline surge through my body and hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous, I thought. I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off, just woods. On either side of me, I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, and I could see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell, I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 yards or so away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man, David, was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through, for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So, I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught in a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in a pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple of trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. I hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features, but I swear on my old man David's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there staring at the trees those people had just ducked behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the bed of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas as I sped off. I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours, straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about the whole thing and how stupid I was to get out of my truck. I should have just minded my own business, but the thought of some kids being kidnapped or worse was just too much for me to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't just rush me when they had the chance, or what they were planning to do to me if I ran out in the woods after the kids screaming. After all these years of being a trucker, nothing has ever come close to being as strange or downright terrifying as this experience. My name is Alex, and I'm 39 years old. For most of my adult life, I've been driving trucks. I don't often talk about my job, and I certainly don't frequently recount the story I'm about to tell. It's lingered with me for years, and I feel like if I don't say it out loud, I might lose my mind. It all began with a haul departing from Lincoln, a routine job transporting HVAC units to Salt Lake City. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was running solo in my own rig, which isn't new but is reliable, and that's what truly matters. The schedule was packed tightly, leaving no room for delay, so an overnight drive was necessary if I wanted to stay on track. That wasn't a major issue for me. I've handled worse. The drive proceeded smoothly for the first several hours. There was no traffic, and once I reached the Wyoming section of I-80, I scarcely saw another pair of headlights. I've traversed that stretch countless times. I knew the exits well, which ones offered fuel and which boasted coffee that was at least tolerable. Roughly around 1 a.m., I passed mile marker 313. I only took note of it because I'd seen that specific number the previous week on the same route. I recall thinking it sounded like a hotel room or an apartment number, and for some inexplicable reason, it stuck in my mind. However, as I passed it this time, I felt an odd tightening in my chest. Not a sign of heart trouble, but more like an intuition that something was amiss. You know that feeling when you enter a room and instantly sense that something's wrong, even if you can't pinpoint why? It was similar to that. Initially, I figured I might be hungry. I hadn't eaten anything substantial besides gas station peanuts and energy drinks since lunchtime. That's when the CB radio made a sound. It wasn't tuned to any channel I normally use, and there was no one else nearby to be transmitting, but it crackled and hissed as if someone was attempting to communicate. I leaned closer, assuming it was just static, but beneath it, faint and barely audible, there was a voice. A woman's voice, perhaps muffled and wet-sounding. "Do you see her?" That's all I caught. I grabbed the microphone and said, "Repeat that." There was no response. I switched channels, trying to make contact with someone, but encountered only silence. absolute quiet. Not even traffic updates or the usual trucker chatter, just the sound of my tires and the soft groan of my engine. Then, ahead on the road, I spotted something. A woman was walking along the shoulder. She was dressed in a long white gown, barefoot, with her hair falling into her face. She was perhaps 30 feet from the edge of the lane, walking steadily and slowly, not hitchhiking, not waving or crying for help, just moving forward. What struck me as odd was that she didn't appear cold. She had no shoes, no coat, and didn't react to my headlights. It was as if she was completely unaware of my presence. I sounded the air horn at full blast. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. I gently steered the truck slightly left, giving her space without crossing the center line, and drove past her. She continued walking as if I didn't exist. I glanced in the side mirror. She was gone. Not a hint of white fabric, no shadow, nothing. I've witnessed some truly bizarre things on the road. People heavily intoxicated, animals darting between lanes, even once a man setting up a lawn chair in the median and simply waving at traffic. But this chilled me in a way I couldn't fully grasp. Even so, I didn't stop. I just kept driving, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a hallucination. Perhaps I dozed off for a second and dreamt the whole thing. I kept searching for an explanation, but nothing seemed to fit. An hour later, I pulled off at a rest stop. It was one of those small pullouts with no services, no vending machines, just a broken picnic table and a buzzing floodlight illuminating a small patch of gravel. I got out to stretch and have a smoke. That's when I noticed footprints on the side step. They were bare, small, damp, as if someone had stood there while I was driving. I stood staring at them for an indefinite period. My cigarette burned down in my hand. I flung the passenger door open quickly, perhaps a bit too fast. It slammed against the side of the trailer. I checked the cab. It was empty. The sleeper berth was vacant. There was just a scent. It was this stale, wet, earthy odor, like a basement that had flooded years ago and never dried. It didn't belong in my truck. I secured all the locks and got back on the road. Then something occurred that I still can't explain. Even after all these years, about 20 minutes later, I passed mile marker 313 once more. I hadn't turned around. I was still heading westbound. The GPS confirmed I was exactly on course, yet there it was. The same marker, the same location, and along with it, the same peculiar gut feeling, as if my stomach was contracting. And approximately 100 yards ahead, there she was again. The same woman, the same white dress, the same deliberate walk, but this time she looked up and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It wasn't human. It stretched impossibly wide. Her mouth opened as if trying to convey an expression on a face not designed for it. Her teeth. There seemed to be too many. They were too long. I didn't stop. I didn't even blink. I drove straight through her. I braced for impact, but there was none. Just a sudden blast of cold air, like opening a freezer in complete darkness. My windshield fogged up instantly from the inside. My breath formed clouds inside the cabin. Moisture from the sudden cold made my hands slip slightly on the steering wheel, and then it was over. The fog cleared. The cold vanished. It was as though the entire truck had exhaled. I didn't stop again until morning light began to appear in the sky. I pulled into a truck stop with actual lights, people, and noise. I parked and just sat there with the engine off, door locked. My hands remained on the wheel, as if I was afraid to let go. I completed the delivery that day, unloaded as usual. I didn't say a word to the customer or the dispatcher, just nodded, signed the paperwork, and left. A week later, back at the terminal in Nebraska, I was cleaning the cab, lifted the passenger seat, and found a scrap of white cloth tucked near the hinge. It was still damp, smeared in something dark. Rust, blood. I couldn't be sure. The number was written on it. 313. That was the end of my long-haul career. I didn't make a formal announcement. I simply informed dispatch that I wouldn't be doing overnight runs anymore. I took local jobs, only short routes during the daytime. I've never traveled that section of I-80 again. I won't. When people ask why I changed my routes, why I gave up long-haul driving, I tell them it was the schedule, the stress, my back. They nod. It makes sense. I'm 36 years old now. Driving long-haul for roughly 15 years has been my life. Most nights blend together, just asphalt, white lines, bad coffee, and radio static. You stop paying attention to the odd things you see out there. You categorize them as quirks of the road. But there's one night I simply can't categorize. I've tried. This was back in 2020. I was on a route, hauling steel down from Salt Lake City towards Phoenix. A pretty standard trip. My dispatcher instructed me to avoid Flagstaff Pass because an early snowstorm had closed it down the night before. So, I took the longer route through eastern Arizona along Highway 101. If you've ever driven it, you know it's about as empty as they come. No lights, no gas for miles, just scattered red rock formations and a 2-lane highway stretching so far. It feels like you're driving on a ribbon, unspooling into nothingness. It was late, probably just past midnight when the exhaustion hit. Not the kind you can shake off with an energy drink or by rolling down the window. This was different. My eyelids felt like lead weights. My arms felt heavy. I kept missing mile markers drifting across the center line, jerking the wheel to center the truck. I pulled off onto a small dirt patch along the shoulder. It wasn't a marked turnout, just a little space to get the cab safely off the road and avoid getting hit. I applied the brake, turned off the engine, and reclined the seat. I used my flannel shirt as a blindfold to block the dashboard glow. I don't think I was actually asleep when I heard the knocking. It came from underneath the cab. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. A tap, a pause, another tap. Like fingernails or bone striking metal. It wasn't rhythmic like the sound of an engine cooling down. It sounded deliberate. I froze, stayed completely still, and listened. My mind immediately tried to find a logical explanation. Probably a raccoon, I thought. Or maybe a loose bracket settling. But the intervals were too spaced out, as if it was waiting between taps, as if it wanted me to know it was there. I slowly removed the flannel from my eyes and checked the mirrors. They reflected only blackness. Desert nights absorb light like a sponge. Even with a full moon, you can't see much beyond the shoulder. I reached out the window with my flashlight, angling it down to get a glimpse under the truck. Nothing, just dust and shadows. The knocking stopped. I sat back. My heart was beating a little faster than I cared to admit, and I reached for the keys. The moment I turned the ignition, the cab filled with a horrific screeching sound from the radio. Not static, not feedback. It sounded like metal being ripped in half. A long, high-pitched, nails-on-glass kind of screaming. I scrambled to turn it off, grabbed the knob, and twisted it too forcefully. I actually snapped it off in my hand. Silence fell like a hammer strike. And in that silence, I saw her. He was standing behind the trailer, just there, about 20 feet back in the middle of the dirt road where I'd pulled off. She looked like a woman, perhaps in her mid-30s. Black hair, long and tangled. Her skin tone suggested she might have been Navajo, but something was off. Her limbs dangled loosely, as if her joints weren't functioning correctly. Her mouth was hanging open, as if she was screaming, but no sound emerged. Her arms hung limply at her sides, except for her right hand. That one kept twitching, as if stuck in a repetitive motion. I didn't move. I don't even think I breathed. My whole body screamed at me to stay still. Don't react. Don't blink. Don't stare too long. Every instinct I possessed screamed, "She knows you see her. She's waiting for something." And then I blinked. She was gone. I bolted out of the cab with a flashlight, circled the trailer, and called out, "Hey, you okay?" No answer, no movement. just the wind's hum and the engine's cooling ticks. When I stepped back toward the cab, I heard something hit the ground near my foot. A faint clink. It was a tooth, a molar, human, yellowed, old, still had the root. I froze. My hands began to tremble, and I scanned the dirt for any sign of movement. That's when I saw something dart under the trailer. Just a flicker of movement, too fast to track clearly. I crouched and aimed the light under the rig. Nothing moved, but the dust under the truck was covered in handprints. Dozens, perhaps more. They were small, like children's hands. Some were smeared, as if something had been crawling, dragging itself under the trailer. Others were just flat impressions pressed into the dirt on the tires, the gas tank, the undercarriage. There were even a few higher up, as if someone had been climbing the side. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. I retrieved the crowbar from behind the seat and just sat there, gripping the cold metal, eyes darting between the mirrors, waiting. Around 2 a.m., I started to hear whispering. It wasn't inside the cab. It felt like it was coming from outside, circling the truck. I don't speak Navajo, but I grew up in Gallup. I've heard enough of it to recognize the cadence. It wasn't speech. It was chanting, low, rhythmic, continuous. It continued for hours, and I sat there the entire time, not blinking, not speaking, not moving, just listening. By the time the sky lightened and the chanting stopped, I felt as if I'd aged 10 years. My hands were stiff from gripping the crowbar. My legs were numb. I climbed out at dawn and checked everything. The handprints were gone, every single one. Not even smudges in the dust. The ground looked untouched, and the tooth was gone. I didn't waste any time. I started the engine and drove. Didn't stop. To eat, relieve myself, or stretch. I made it to Phoenix by early afternoon. That night, I called an old co-worker, Martin. He used to run freight through that area back in the day. I told him what happened, and when I got to the part about the woman and the tooth, he fell silent. Then he said, "You saw her." "What do you mean her?" "She walks out there," he said, referring to those old roads. "Sometimes she shows up when you stop alone. Looks like a woman, but she isn't. Once she sees you, she doesn't forget." I haven't taken that route again. I don't stop on tribal land anymore, not even for 5 minutes. I barely drive at night now unless I'm in a convoy or close to a truck stop. I've been driving trucks for longer than some dispatchers have been alive. 23 years and counting. I don't scare easily. I've slept through tornado warnings, hauled loads through ice storms, and even had someone try to hijack me at a rest area. Once. I've seen a lot of weird stuff out there, but nothing like what I saw off Highway 56. This happened about a year ago. I was on a solo run, hauling feed corn out of Wichita Falls, heading west toward Gallup. It's a route I've done 100 times. Generally smooth, mostly back road stretches. Not many towns in between, which is fine by me. I like the solitude. It gives me space to think. That night, I remember everything feeling normal. Maybe too normal. No weird feelings, no red flags. I'd just passed through a small town called Medford and was planning to pull over in about an hour. I wasn't behind schedule or pushing too hard. It was just another leg of the journey. I'd been on the road for about 5 hours when I saw a sign for a rest area. The sign was faded green, looked like it had been shot up, letters half missing. But I made out rest stop and an arrow pointing off the highway. Here's the thing, I'd never seen that sign before, and I know that road, not just from memory. I've logged it on GPS routes, in old logbooks, you name it. But I was tired. Not tired enough to be falling asleep at the wheel, just heavy-eyed and sore, ready to park the rig and call it a night. So, I took the turn off. The rest area was barely more than a slab of cracked pavement, lined with dead vegetation and broken fencing. No lights, no other vehicles, no vending machines or trash cans. Just a big empty patch of dirt and concrete. I hesitated. Something felt wrong about it. I couldn't put my finger on why. Just this strange feeling in my chest. like a drop in air, pressure, like when you walk into a room and feel like someone was just talking about you. I almost kept going, but I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was just an old stop I'd never noticed before. Maybe it was decommissioned, maybe temporary, whatever. I'd sleep, get back on the road, and be in Gallup by mid-morning. So I parked, killed the engine, and climbed into the sleeper. I cracked the window, just a crack for air out of habit, and locked both doors. Then I lay back and was asleep within minutes. That sleep didn't last long. I woke up maybe an hour later. No noise, just this sudden, sharp awareness that something was wrong. My eyes snapped open and it hit me. There wasn't a single sound. No wind, no insects, no engine ticking, nothing. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was wrong, artificial, like the whole world had been muted. Then the smell hit. Thick, wet, rotten, like meat left too long in a hot car. It made me gag, and I sat up fast, bumping my head on the ceiling. My heart was already racing before I even reached for the flashlight. I switched it on and leaned forward toward the windshield. The beam cut through the cab and out across the lot. That's when I saw it. Someone was standing on the road, right in the middle of the asphalt, not far from my truck, just standing there. No movement, no lights, no reason to be there. At first, I figured maybe they had broken down. Maybe their car had gone off the road. I tried the key in the ignition as if nothing was amiss. My stomach dropped. I tried again, still dead. My rig never fails me. I'm obsessive about pre-trip checks. The battery was brand new, installed 6 days earlier. I tried a third time, slower, still nothing. I turned the flashlight back toward the road. The figure was still there. Same spot, same posture, just waiting. I stared, trying to make out more details. It was tall, really tall. The arms hung too low, down past where knees should be. And the way it stood wasn't natural. It wasn't hunched, but its neck was tilted, bent sideways as if its head had been popped out of place. Its head twitched slightly, like it was adjusting to the light, but it didn't step forward. It didn't retreat. It just swayed slowly from side to side. I pulled from the windshield and turned off the flashlight. For the next 10, maybe 15 minutes, I sat there in the dark, listening, breathing shallowly, waiting for it to move. And then, I looked again, and it was gone. I switched the flashlight back on, swept the beam across the lot. Nothing. I almost allowed myself to breathe. Then came a tap against the passenger side window. I didn't turn right away, just froze. That kind of fear where your brain won't even let your muscles move. Eventually, I looked. There was a face upside down, pressed against the glass. It had climbed onto the roof. Its mouth was wide open, so wide it looked like its jaw had unhinged. No teeth inside, just a black wet hole. Its skin was stretched too tight over its skull and slick with something thick. Oil, maybe, or blood. I couldn't tell. Its eyes were the worst part. White, too white, like they were carved from chalk, and they bulged. No lids, no movement, just these pale orbs staring straight through the glass. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My whole body locked up, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I backed slowly toward the sleeper, keeping my eyes on it. Then, without warning, it dropped out of sight. No sound, no thud on the hood, just gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, flashlight aimed at the windshield, wrench in my lap, sweating through my clothes. At some point, I must have passed out. When I woke up, it was light out. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Desert stretch, empty highway, birds in the distance, like nothing had happened. I started the truck first try. The engine purred like a contented cat. I didn't eat, didn't check the tires. I just drove. Didn't stop until I hit Gallup. That night, I parked at a large, crowded truck stop. Lots of lights, people moving around. I felt safe until I climbed into the sleeper and pulled the curtain and saw the handprints. 2 of them, long, wet, smeared, across the outside of the passenger side window, as if something had been trying to get in. I cleaned them off, didn't tell anyone. A couple of weeks later, I was filling up in El Paso. I was chatting with another driver while the pumps clicked. I casually mentioned Highway 56. I told him I'd taken a weird old rest stop west of Medford. His face went pale. He looked at me and said, "You pulled off there?" I nodded. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "You saw it." Then he walked away. Didn't say goodbye, didn't finish his coffee. Now I don't take that road anymore. I reroute through Amarillo, adds about 2 hours depending on traffic. Don't care. I don't stop at rest areas I don't recognize. I don't crack my window. I don't ignore my gut feelings. And I don't sleep as easily as I once did because whatever that thing was, it knew me. It climbed up there on purpose. It wanted in, but it didn't get me.